Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel. This is episode 8 of Writerly Conversations. Yeah, because we're like 1 month.
Probably.
Yeah, because we started in December, so 1 month, whatever the month. Yeah, it's 8.
Yes.
It's episode 8. Last month we did a live show where we talked about the debuts Blood Like Magic and the Other Black Girl. It was on Bridge channel, so I will have that link in the description box below, along with the playlist with all the episodes, so you can just go back and catch up on what you missed. And I'm gonna let Britt introduce herself, and then we'll get into today's topic.
Hi, I am Britt. My channel is Britt Writerly. It's a book and author tube that talks about the intersections of, I almost said race and religion. Incorrect. Incorrect.
It was like that's a deep channel right there.
Right.
Okay.
We're deep, but wrong swimming pool. So we talk about the intersection, or rather, I talk about the intersection of literature and culture, and share just my writing journey, some original content in the form of poetry, and bookish content like book talks. So head on over if you would like to click around on some videos, see what you see. If you like what you do see, hit that big thumbs up button. If you think that you can commit to this, if there can be an us, you hit that big red button and then we can be internet friends.
Y'all. Okay, so today we are going to talk about what I have termed Black American erasure. And so the topic is one that me and Britt have talked about like privately quite a bit, but it's one that recently came to Twitter among published authors in conversations. And so that prompted me to be like, hey, Britt, I think this would be like a good talk for us to have. And so pretty much the conversation is going to be centered around what we have both seen as a very big growth in stories from Black American writers in fantasy that steep in Caribbean or African themes. As if there cannot be Black Americans in America in fantasy. And so the conversation was prompted by a review by a Justine Marie, and it was published by Rebel Women Lit as a literary magazine, and it was her critical review of Witches Steeped in Gold. Now, I will continue this conversation by saying I have not read Witches Steeped in Gold, and will not be speaking about the book itself, but more the commentary around the book, because one, I've never read it, and two, I don't directly come from a Caribbean lineage, so I also don't feel like I could speak towards the accuracy of that. So I wanted to make that clear coming off. So the basis of her review is that as being someone who is from Jamaica, lived in Jamaica, not just someone from in the Black diaspora with Jamaican roots, she felt as though she was a stranger reading about her land in a way that she could not recognize it. And one line that she says that really, really stuck out to me, and it's towards the end of the review, which I will leave a link to, as well as the Twitter conversation that it sparked in the description box. She says, diasporic fictions of the Caribbean can do better for us by facilitating the space and permission for the region to show itself in this world accepted, to speak through these pages, instead of having us read along silenced as our cultural richness is picked through and diluted in order to fit the author's way of telling us about our culture. And so what this sparked in conversation about published authors on Twitter was some authors feeling as though other people in the diaspora are telling others what they can and cannot write. and how they can and cannot get in touch with their roots and their history. And then the Queen JL, who I respect so much for Wings of Ebony, because as we have both said, like, it was a fantasy set in America. Like, there's another land, but like, it's how does this affect us in this world? Why do we always have to go to another country to experience these fantastical things? And so her point was that while she understands the person's point, that was saying that they didn't feel, you know, that that diasporic people are telling them what they can and cannot write. She said she understood that. She said that she felt that it was more of a publishing issue, because publishing is saying which book can get out there and whatnot. And she says one thing that she specifically said in her tweet that stood out to me and prompted me to join in on the conversation was, what I see are readers tired of not seeing themselves, the nuance and the textures of their cultures in a book. That's relatable AF, but that's largely on publishing, right? Because in no way should it be one author's responsibility to make an entire people feel seen, which she said she knew that the original person was not saying. But it brought the conversation to a point where we felt we should talk about it, because it's something that we both feel. So that's the introduction to it. So I know what we're gonna be talking about and why. Like, I feel like I tried to keep it brief, but I feel like it wasn't. But oh well.
You know, there. All right. Context was provided.
Right. So your thoughts?
I think, I mean, you know, I adore JL in the least creepy way that I can manage. But I mean, it's not even like I agree with JL. We have been having this conversation before then, and I agree with what she said, which is, I mean, not always we're talking about, but I am just, it comes back once again to Black erasure. And when we're talking about Black people, the way that, like, when you were talking about Black people and Black experiences, because we're not a monolith, the way that racism lands is not always the same for all Black people. What I am not saying is that certain Black people don't experience racialized, structured oppression, racism. That ain't what I'm saying. I'm saying in America, the preferred Black person is an international Black person, because they have more culture, and that, like, it's very exoticized and fetishized, which is weird for them. So like that has its own dimensions. And also for American Black people in America, we are always the first person in that scenario to be erased, because, oh, well, y'all are dirty and ghetto and uneducated, and you lazy. Like, it's all of these stereotypes come more heavily on Black Americans when we're talking about Black people in America, and international people who like immigrated to America in that first generation. That is what I'm saying. So when we talk about writing, those are the stories that get preferred. And so what then pressure does that create for Black Americans, or even African Americans, who are like, oh, I know and have family in this Caribbean diasporic places? Do they feel pressured to then write those stories, even though that is not your experience? You have a Black American experience, even though you know that your heritage is in Mozambique or Nigeria, or, you know, where the Congo, Jamaica, wherever. Just because you know that you have cousins, aunties, uncles, grandparents there, doesn't mean that story is going to be available to you to write in a way that those family members would recognize as their own. But is there an added pressure for Black Americans to write that story instead of the one that's most familiar, because we already know and have been taught that that's going to be devalued, that won't get published, that won't get praised?
Yeah, I think for me, whenever I think about it and I see it, it always goes back to, it's more comfortable to write about those places, because in those places the bad guys look like the good guys. When you write about Black America, it's very hard to write and not have to include the racism that exists in this country. And so for me, I feel like, and this is my personal opinion, it may or may not be true, I feel like for publishing, it's so much easier to allow books to be written where the other bad guys are Black people. For me, I think that that is something that, because you're writing in Caribbean and African places, majority of your characters are going to
everybody Black.
Everybody's Black, so the bad guys are going to be Black, right? And so when people write stories about being Black in America, you're not going to be able to write them without racism.
Right.
And racism makes the majority uncomfortable.
Right.
That's why in other fantasy books, there's a dominant race and low-key and only race. You don't hear about other people. Like, it's been a thing where we have fantasies where everybody is Caucasian. And it's never something that's brought up. Because it's easier to create a world where other people don't exist in these fantasy worlds. So then you don't have to factor in racism. And I think that is a part of the publishing thing, right? Because, and I feel like now, like, as far as contemporaries go, it's not an issue, right? Like, we can talk about being a Black person in a all white space in contemporaries, but for some reason in fantasy, and I remember reading like critiques of JL's book about like not enough world building and and I was like, well, so what part of urban fantasy did we not get? First of all, what part of that did we not get? Second of all, her book was for a specific group of people like me and Britt, who never see ourselves in fantasy books. First of all, very rarely do I see myself in a fantasy book that has people of other races, and I'm not either constantly surrounded by everybody that doesn't look like me, or I'm biracial in some sort. Like, there's always some diluting of how Black I am or how Black my experience is. And that is a dynamic of what publishing says is good, what publishing says is going to sell, right? And so I think, one, I don't think it's wrong for the people who are actually from those places and live in those places and experience what happens in those places to say, hey, I don't feel like this was an adequate representation, right? Because we do that when white people write our stories. And I feel like we have to be honest and honor all Black people and realize that all Black people can't write stories for all Black people. And I feel like that is part of what my counter argument to to Tracy's argument about, we're saying who can tell what, and no, but we're saying that just because you're Black doesn't mean that you should tell these other stories because you have some long line connection to them, right? Like, just because your friend is disabled doesn't mean that you should write a book about a disabled character. Maybe you should let a disabled author have that lane and write that. And I feel the same way for Caribbean authors and African authors, right? Like, I love that there are books out there that are celebrating African inspired culture. I think it's awesome. But I also think about those African authors who grew up in Africa, in those different countries, learning all the mythology, learning all the tales and the stories and those things passed down, who want to write stories, but because it's not as commercialized as the African American author, they don't get that chance.
And I was looking down at because what you were saying is sparking another thing that the reviewer said about Witches, which did not read. I read a bit of it, and it did not pull me. But here's the thing: because of all of because like Kasha said, we've been having this conversation for a minute, and I've been feeling for the last few years that like there are a lot of African inspired, and the reviewer refers to it as like what Wakandification.
Wakandification, yeah.
And I think that is a completely apt term. After Black Panther came out, you could not stop the Black Panther comps, even if it was completely inappropriate and had nothing to do with that book. And we saw that in Children of Blood and Bones. Like it or not, like whether you like Children of Blood and Bones or not, that was not really a Black Panther comparison.
No,
like,
it wasn't comparable with Black Panther at all. And I liked book 1, did not like book 2. It is the middle book, so I'm giving her a pass to see how book 3 comes out, to see if she brings it all home. But I definitely, as I finished book 2, I definitely saw a lot of the complaints people were having about them fleshed out way more in the second book than I did in the first one.
Right. But so to her saying this Wakandification of just this upcropping of African inspired kingdoms, I definitely think so. Another part that you saying that reminded me of this, and what I was looking for was this part where she's talking about like, why should I as a Jamaican reader feel isolated from the place where you say inspired this book that everyone else is saying is great, but makes me feel like a stranger. And so she says, I say this to continue the conversations we've been having on the care and the harm of creating works of the Caribbean that only push citizens and natives further into fiction. It's more than just griping with the construction of this fantasy world, but how this fictional world aids in the mechanizations of erasing the real one. When readers are taken to approaching these Caribbean inspired books to dip their toes in realities of new to them locales. And so this part where she says there's already a notable shift in who these stories are catered to and imagined for. And that's the thing. So for me, Children of Blood and Bones, Witches Steeped in Gold, fill in the blank. I was waiting for stories like Wings of Ebony, for stories like Daughters of Jubilation, where there are Black people in America experiencing magic, right? And not as a way to escape, but as just another mode of engagement, right? That's what I was waiting for. So when I'm seeing these other African inspired stories, I'm excited for the people who they were written for, but they weren't written for me. And so much as that's not the story that I'm waiting to hear where I see myself. And so when I say I DNF'd, which is Steeped in Gold early, that just wasn't the story that I was waiting for. I was so honored by when Edelweiss sent it to me, unsolicited, maybe because I had said something on Twitter about like the cover is so beautiful and it is like lovely. But when I started reading it, I was like, oh, this is another. I want more books like Wings and Daughters. And so that's what I'm gonna say. I DNF'd early. This reviewer got way farther than me because like she was waiting for this story and I wasn't. So I'll say that. But what I really think is so important about what she's saying is the part about audience. Who are these stories being written for? Are they, because she also talks about like the use of patois, and how it just seems like a word is sprinkled in every once in a while as a sort of alarm to remind the reader that we're in a supposedly Jamaican inspired place. And so in that way, if you were writing to a Jamaican audience, they would not need this long stretch of English and then sprinkles of patois. They'd be able to engage in a fuller way with the language and the culture and what have you. And that prompted the reviewer to ask, is this a story that's written for me where I'm getting to see myself, or is this a story written for others where you're trying to show them my world? And it's not, I'm saying that it's not my world.
Right. And I think that was really important because and this is not nothing on Shannon in any way, because we're only seeing the version of the book after it's been edited and publishing has done what they're going to do to it.
Exactly.
So in that, I don't know what that first draft, that second, that third draft, the draft when she got her agent, I don't know what those look like to be able to say, but I do think there is some truth in knowing, even in contemporary Black American books, how much there is explanation given about things that we see the authors say they wrote for us. but the book is written for somebody else to understand, because there are things that we don't need to explain, right? Like, and it's they do it in clever ways, like, oh, the lady in the elevator looked like she might be googling what kitchen was, and da 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 da, and the other black girl, right? And that's like the cute way to kind of explain what it is in the story. But if you were really writing for black people, you would just write the words and there would be no need for explanation because we know what those words are. And so in that concept, I think that I think that there is something to be said about writing for your audience and then your work being changed for a different audience. Because even with Black Buck, like whenever Mateo talks about it, he's like, even at the beginning of the book, if you read the book as it's written says that it was written for black people. And if you're not black, just imagine that you are. Don't go don blackface or anything like that, but just put yourself in the mindset of what a black American would have to go through as you're reading this book, type of thing. But even in that,
I think it's slippery. I think it is slippery to say, imagine that you're black. Now, I do a subtexting exercise with my students, and I just had to clarify it to them the other day, because in the subtexting, the way the exercise is written, you write it in the first person. So you are putting yourself in the position of the writer. So we were reading Kindred. So what would Dana be feeling the first time that she met Rufus? You subtexting that, you would say, thinking about her motivations, where is she in the scene, who else is there, and how might their presence be affecting Dana? And we're answering those questions, you write in the first person. And so what I clarified for them the other day is, for those of you who are having ethical concerns about you being a white male, whatever, or even an indigenous male, whatever, like whoever, not a black woman writing in the first person for that, it is a very good discomfort to have. I'm glad you have it. What I'm asking you to do is to stand beside Dana and write in the first person, because you are seeing what she's seeing standing beside her, not to evacuate her from her position. But that's the same sort of care that we have to have when we say, just imagine that you're somebody. Hold on.
right.
Let's not, because you cannot. And there's no utility in you doing it, because at the end of the day, when the book ends, you're still not going to be Mateo or whoever or Buck, whoever the protagonist of that book is. You're not going to be that person. You're going to have to continue to move through this world as you. So rather than pretending or imagining that you're that person, walk through this book with them and think about how you in your position are able to understand the significance of what they're experiencing, and in what ways are you called into that? In what ways are you a part of that? And then as you move through your life, how can you move differently because of what you know? Not as Buck, because you're never going to be him. And that removes the responsibility from you as a non-Black person to have to do anything in your own body. Does that make sense? Like if you were putting yourself in someone else's position, you're leaving your own, and then you leave all of the baggage of your own experience, as opposed to standing beside that person. And then when the book is over, moving as you are through the world and interrupting things as you are able to from your position. But I don't think it's ever helpful to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Like, I know that's the phrase, but in practice, I think it's better to say stand beside and walk beside this person, and be thoughtful about how you, from your position, can activate in that situation, or if you should.
I can say that I agree with you in that, because I feel like you can always empathize, but you can never truly know if you've never been that or been through that. Like I feel like in a lot of situations that people always are like, like, I understand. And it's like, no, you empathize, like, because you can't truly understand some things unless you have to live it, right? Like, I won't know what it's like to be trans because I don't have to live that life. Like,
Right.
there are things that come with that life that I will never understand because I've never had to go through it. But same way, there's things that as a Black woman, a white woman will never be able to understand because you're never going to go through that. And I think in telling people to, like, imagine themselves in other people's shoes is one, I feel like, to think that you can imagine how bad it is in someone else's shoes is a very arrogant thought, in my opinion.
I agree.
I think it's
I
very
agree.
think that you can understand something without actually having gone through it. I think that you can understand the ramifications of what things can do to that person. I think you can understand the potential consequences of those things or things that happen, but I don't think you can understand the inner turmoil, the day ins and day outs, the microaggressions that individuals have to deal with in their different marginalized groups, unless you're a part of them. Um, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think we're all like, I think it is, what is the word I want to use? I think that it is uh foolish. Yes, foolish is the word I want to use. I think that it is foolish to try to push the narrative that we are all the same. We are all different and our differences should be celebrated.
Right.
The issue with making everybody the same is that you erase the things that make them unique, and you're telling them that to be the same is to be good and to be different is to be bad. And that's where the issues come in. If we stopped making difference bad, we wouldn't have these issues, right? So if we stopped making talking about the Black American experience a bad thing, we wouldn't have so many Black American writers trying to reach back to these islands and countries that they want some connection with, right? Like, I understand the desire to write, to want to write Caribbean inspired and African inspired things, because it is a longing for a connection that you don't actually get to have. And if we were being honest, that's a whole conversation about white supremacy and colonialization that we don't want to talk about, that affects Black creativity.
It does. And even Octavia Butler, and I can't remember who, no, I can't. It's Nadia Corfor. So she was doing an interview about adopting maybe one of the patternists, like she was talking about Octavia Butler's influence on her writings, I think, and she was saying, like, finding Octavia Butler, like, wow, what a marvel. And she was saying that she had seen in an interview where one of Octavia Butler's books that was set in Africa, or that she wanted to write about in Africa or something like that, she couldn't go as far as she wanted to go. Octavia Butler, who's an American Black woman, she couldn't go as far as she wanted to because she didn't want to do it in injustice because she wasn't from there. And so in being able to do, why are words escaping me? She's an adaptation of that world. And Nydia Okorafor is like, I feel like it's like just kismet in full circle that I, as the Nigerian woman, will be able to take it where Octavia Butler wanted to, but didn't have the capacity. And saying that is not an insult. It's just a responsible thing for a writer to do. To say that you don't have the capacity or the range, it doesn't mean that you're inept. It just means that that's just not an experience you have access to, and you have to acknowledge that. And then Octavia Butler, and all of her brilliance and glory, can say that she just couldn't write that. Then who are we to be like, well, I can write it because X, X, and X. Like, some things we just don't have the range for. That's okay.
And that even I love that you brought Dr. Okorafor up, because she had a Twitter feed that I saw the other day where she was talking about she wants people to stop categorizing her work as Afrofuturism. It's
African futurism,
for the exact same reason that we're not trying to take over one category. We're showing that there are two different lanes, and they both deserve respect, and they both deserve accolades, and they both deserve writers in both of them. And she even speaks to because in the thread, and I'll include that thread in there, there is a link to either like an essay or something on her website, like a blog post about where she speaks about learning the difference and understanding the difference between the two. And of course, you would think it's pretty simple. Afro is more so African American. African futurism is exactly that, African futurism. And the concepts in them are slightly different. And because of that, I think that her making that acknowledgement was not a slight against Afrofuturism, but it was an explanation and a line drawn in the sand so that you know these are two different categories, and you don't need to cut me out of my category or put me into this category to cut someone else out. Same with another thread I'll put in here, N.K. Jemisin, speaking about how in the science fiction and fantasy world, there was an anthology that came out and N.K. Jemisin and Octavia Butler weren't mentioned in it, but there were newer science fiction and fantasy authors. And N.K. Jemisin was like, you know, like I prefer this because my name is out there. They know me. These authors don't get this shine. And I would have been taking a place from these authors. And though they you know, she's a Black American and Octavia is a Black American, it's still the conversation of taking up space from other people is the bottom line. And I feel like we have to be open and admit to the fact that we have the capability of doing that to each other as Black people. And to think that, no, just because I'm Black and you're Black, I can't in some way infringe upon your storytelling, your ability, is wrong. I'm a firm believer that just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something.
And sometimes, as Octavia Butler said, you can't do it anyway. Just because people will give you the space to do something doesn't mean you really have the ability to do it, just because it's going to be let slide. And to reiterate, at this point, we're not talking about witches because neither of us read it. We're talking about this issue writ large, or like across publishing.
Right. Because again, this isn't about one specific author. And again, like we said, we couldn't speak on the accuracy even if we had read it, because it's not something that we know into. Right. Like I have Caribbean people in my family and I could ask them, but I still wouldn't. It's still, even if it was wrong, it wouldn't affect me like it would affect them, because that's not where I'm from. Right. Now, when I see books written about Tulsa, I feel a certain type of way because, yeah, I grew up there and I live there and I know that history, right? But that's because that's where I'm from. Like, I feel like Britt would read a character about somebody from Arkansas and be like, okay, you taking a little bit too much liberal license right here. Like, because really, like, we do want accurate representations of ourselves. And even in saying that, like, even with Wings of Ebony, like, I loved Wings of Ebony, but at the same time, like, it was not indicative of my hood life experience. So I was like, man, I mean, I'm from the hood, and what she did don't sound hood adjacent at all. Like, I don't know. But again, that also goes back to, we're seeing the edit that comes after publishing has done what it's going to do to that original manuscript. So I don't know how hood the first version was. And as much as I love JL, I think it might have been a little bit more hood than the version we got. But you know, we got it, and that was what I was happy about. Like, it doesn't matter that it wasn't perfect, right? It matters that we got it. It matters that I can give that to my nieces. It matters that I can give that to my little cousins. It matters that when I go back to my hood high school, I could give copies of this book to people graduating from my high school, and it would inspire them. It would make them feel seen. And I feel like with so many emergence of African-inspired and Caribbean-inspired fantasy books, some Black kids are getting forgotten.
A lot of Black kids are getting forgotten, because and we had this conversation when we were talking about, it was an early writerly conversation, but you were saying essentially that, like, your brother as a young reader, if he didn't see himself in it, he just wasn't gonna read it. And so what because there are books about Black Americans, right? Like The Black Kids by Christina Hayman's got a lot of play, like Angie Thomas.
Jason Reynolds, right? Like,
Like we have anointed authors who are representing black children and kidlit and lovely, right? Just South of Home, Karen Strong, middle grade. Like, so we do have some, and actually that's like a fantasy as well, because there's a ghost in that story. So we do have a lot in contemporary, but in fantasy, I worry about what, especially, and we didn't even talk about this, Black girl magic. I just wonder what impression middle grade and young adult readers are getting if everything is Black girl magic this and Black girl magic that, but then when it's time to tell a story about Black girl magic, those people are never in America.
Right.
Or not never. Rarely, hardly ever, disproportionately in other countries, etc.
Or they're in situations that most Black Americans wouldn't find themselves in.
Right.
Like we talked about that, especially because we love to talk about like that there are no Black friendships. Like they're isolated from their culture. And it's like, again, back to what Justine Marie said, who are these books being written for in these spaces where they're not? And it's like contemporary, I feel like contemporary, we do a good job. I feel like other genres, that's where we fall off. And it does Black children a disservice because there are so many of us into science fiction and fantasy. Mm-hmm. There are so many of us that are like, that love those type of stories, but don't see ourselves in them.
Right. Exactly. And so if I want to give, I mean, I'm surrounded by children. If I want to give one of them a fantasy, which we're not saying that there are not Black fans, that they're flourishing, right? There are so many Black YA fantasies debuting, coming out from already close. Like they're out there. But if we're trying to talk about a specific experience, because again, Blackness is not a monolith. If they want to see themselves, and they are not Nigerian, they are not Sierra Leonean, they are not Jamaican, then what am I? It gets harder for me to find things to show them. Right. But that is really just like themselves. That is a real mirror and not like an approximation that like, well, just imagine you were here or there or elsewhere or whatever. It gets harder, and it gives the impression or the message that there is no Black girl magic in America. You'd have to go somewhere else to find that. But it's Black girl magic hashtag for all these different things to up it, but not in America.
Right. That my Black is less magical because it's not from outside of here.
Exactly. Because you don't know your history. And it's like,
but whose fault is that?
So if you're gonna tell the story, and I almost started going off on a whole, like, there's an AKA chant that's like, when you tell a story, you tell the whole dang story. This is ACA territory, but we're not gonna say that part. The point is, when you tell a story, if you have stones to throw, if you want to get into it, come all the way into the room. Right. Because we're not going to act like we don't understand why Black Americans have less access to history than those who are still living and grew up in the Caribbean diaspora. Right. And that's not what any of our conversation has been. We're not saying that you should be punished for not having access to it. We're just saying that you should be aware of that and write circumspectly to that. But also, just like, let's talk about why Black Americans don't have that access. It's, hello, slavery, my old friend. Like, because the uproot happened so many generations ago, people don't even know what ancestor was originally taken from where. We just don't know. Right. But also, and this is what I love about Daughters of Jubilation, because in Wings of Ebony, we still don't know necessarily where, I almost said Bree, my goodness, Rue, where Rue's magic is coming. Like, we don't know everything about that magic system yet that's coming in book 2, and we patiently / impatiently await.
Ready for that cover drop.
So what are you gonna say at my funeral now that you've killed me? Here lies the body of the love of my life, whose heart I broke without a gun to my head.
If you see me happy, just leave me alone. I deserve this.
I can't wait for that cover drop.
Let me know. So there's that, right? But like, what I like about Daughters of Jubilation by Cara Cothran is that, and first of all, the cover is gorgeous. Oh my gosh, that cover is gorgeous. But then the other thing about, I believe the protagonist's name is Emmy. The book is on my bookshelf. I can't go get it, but I think her name is Emmy. What I love about Emmy and her family, why am I thinking the protagonist, this beautiful Black girl in her family, this teenage Black girl. What I love about that magic is that magic is said to come from like her family. So showing that like all Black girl magic does not come from an African inspired whatever. Like you don't always have to do that historiography to say that this family has magic, this magic called jubilation. They are in the 60s. That magic is, and that magic is just theirs in this Southern place, and it's very Southern. I just love that. Like it doesn't always have to get traced to where did this come from? Well, it came from our ancestors on the island of or on the coast. We don't always know that. What we know is that we have this magic here and that it's in these regional contexts, and we can be precise about where we are now and how we use it. And I think that is just as valuable as being able to trace it back to our original honored ancestor, wherever they came from. Test it.
Okay, also I looked up the cover. It is a very gorgeous cover. It is a gorgeous cover.
Glowing.
It's a gorgeous cover.
Is her name Emmy? I haven't picked up that book in so long.
Let me see. Whenever Amazon wants to pull it up.
Come on, Amazon.
Eveline or Evie.
Evie. Yeah. Evie or Evie. I don't have, there's no audio version, so I don't know how they pronounce it particularly, but I was like, I know it's a double.
It's Evie.
Yeah. I was like, Emmy, but that don't feel right. But I know it's two letters in the middle. Yes. Evie. So I loved it, and I loved that magic was Black girl magic in America, and it was in history, right? Because it is a historical fantasy. It's in the 60s, but we can talk about Black history without going all the way back past the Middle Passage. There's a lot of Black history in America, but like you said, Shay, we don't want to talk about in any way incriminating white people because it's fantasy, and that makes it less real. And it's like, no, that makes it less real to you, but again, as this critical reviewer said, who is your audience? Because it's very real to Black people.
You won't go away. I thought if I ignored you, you'd go away, but no.
He just wants a kiss.
I was like, if I ignore him, he'll stop. If I ignore him, he'll
Not
stop.
so.
Did you see? I was like, I'm gonna look at her. I'm not gonna.
I saw. I was like, it's a valiant effort.
Yeah, no.
But we already know his personality.
You gonna look at me. Okay, sir. Thank you very much. But yeah, no, I do. I think it's a way to distance itself because it is an uncomfortable thing to have to deal with.
And you can't suspend disbelief if there's racism. What? We don't want to deal with that. But then we know the extension of that is you can't suspend disbelief if there are Black people because racial issues enter with people of color. Right. So like you can only say that first part of you can't suspend disbelief without racism, but we know where that road has also led. Let's not act like, again, if you're gonna tell the story, like it come all the way in the room, that logic has never gone anywhere good. We need to completely unseat it.
Right. I think is a thought that I have that I feel like if we talked about this stuff more, you wouldn't be so uncomfortable. Like it's uncomfortable to learn about Juneteenth being what it is because you never knew it existed, right?
Exactly.
Like if you knew that this was a thing and that the way that you have been taught was wrong, it wouldn't be uncomfortable. Like it's the other things that you have to unlearn and you have to admit once you learn the truth that makes it uncomfortable. And I just in my head, I'm just like, if we just talk about it, like we know this as adults, you know that talking about uncomfortable situations makes them less uncomfortable.
I mean, we understand everything until it comes to race, and that's just the reality.
No. We understand everything until it comes to Black people.
That's true. That is true. And then
I was reading an article and it was talking about how much in California hate crimes had grown against Black people. And even though Asian hate crimes were up 100 and something %, there were still not more Asian hate crimes than hate crimes against Black people.
You always have all the stats. Really? That's wild.
Put the link in the description box, but when
y'all gonna learn today in this description box.
Right, this description box is gonna be full. When I saw it, I was like, one, that doesn't surprise me, but two, you don't think about that, right? Like, so if only 3 Asian hate crimes happened in 2019, but 30 happened in 2020, that's a great big jump, right?
Yeah.
But if 75 were happening in 2019 for Black people and 100 happened in 2020, it's still way more. But that's why I always hate when we talk about percentages, because percentages make you think something is a lot.
Yeah, it depends on what that original number was. Right, how significant.
Number, exactly, yeah. Right? And so I'm not at all saying those were the numbers 370 and 75. Yeah, I wasn't saying that. I'm just saying in the context of how percentages work and numbers work, that's something that you don't take into account when you're reading that article. You don't take into account when that headline is scrolling across your TV screen when you're watching the news, right? Like those are things that don't get put into perspective.
That's true.
Like, and I want to say I am 90% sure that Black Americans are always the majority on the receiving end of hate crimes.
Yeah.
Right. So then the fact that we have laws that don't protect Black people from hate crimes
is racist,
but other people is weird, right? And it's not that. That's why I said we can't say that you don't understand race. It's that for some reason when it comes to Black people, y'all get real silent. The judicial process really stops working. Yes. Y'all ability to write laws and sign bills just evaporates.
You got carpal tunnel all of a sudden. It's always
people just don't show up. Like,
very interesting. Who has to be patient?
Right. But to get back to the topic at hand, not even sure we're gonna keep that part in there because we definitely veered off for a second, but it does still deal with the conversation overall, right? The conversation revolves around what publishing, which is majority white, says is going to be good for public consumption. Right? And so what they say is going to be good affects what Black American creatives create and put out. And I think that if the conversation sticks to talking about Black creators and the way they mess up and not the structure and system that creates the situations for these Black authors to do these things, I think that's a travesty. And I also think that it is very negligent because you're not talking about the source of things, right? Like it was like when we were talking about the other Black girl, or when I talked about Black Butt, like the things that we didn't like about the stories were about the fact that we're ignoring the situations that created these things that we dislike about the stories.
Exactly.
All the emphasis on what we dislike and not the emphasis on what created this discomfort, what created situations. And so I love that in JL's tweet that she brought it back to that, because it's not saying that we shouldn't critique authors that are doing these things. We should, right? Because one, that's the only way to grow. If nobody calls you out on the things that you are doing that are detrimental or that are harmful or problematic, you're not going to know. So first, we have to acknowledge that it's okay for that to happen. And two, we have to talk and have the conversation about why it's happening.
Right.
And I think that JL did that, and it was one of the reasons that was like, okay, it's time for us to have this live conversation, because like we are living in a situation where so many books that I see are getting picked up. It's African inspired, Wakanda comp, like, and it's like, it's awesome, right? Because I am still supporting these authors in the majority. I am still reading these books, right? We both still got the Gilded Ones. We both still read Ray Bear. Like, we both still
and have suggested it to multiple friends and they bought the book. We're doing that.
We're doing that because we understand, one, how hard it is for a Black author.
Period.
We understand the work that it took for you to get to this point to even be able to sell this book and get it out there. So we're going to support, but support does not mean you stop critiquing. It doesn't mean that you stop asking people to come up higher. And it doesn't mean that you stop acknowledging that there are others in our community that's voices are not getting heard because of situations like this.
Right. Right. And I would say also, though, that the Gilded Ones wouldn't necessarily even factor into this conversation because Namina Forna is from Sierra Leone and she grew up there, like all these different things, right? So that didn't even fit in this conversation. But just to say, it's not like we're not going to read the book if it says African inspired or whatever, like that's not the conversation.
Yeah, and that was mainly what I was meaning. So like,
right, exactly.
Again, like, I'm not here to police the stories that other Black people tell. Like, that's not me, right? Because I want us to tell our stories, period. Right. And I want to say JL's, like, the last part of her tweet that I wanted to make sure I read was, she said, I love Witches, by the way, and I hope it does well because publishing can be dumb, and conclude it's not prudent to publish more in that space. No, give us 10,000 books, various in experience, rich in their reflections and authenticity. Give us freedom in publishing. Shit, give us freedom, period. I felt that because Shannon's book shouldn't be the only Jamaican inspired or Jamaican diasporic story, right?
Right.
There should be people picking up actual Black people that live and were raised in the Caribbean because we know that they exist and are telling stories. I have multiple of them that follow my YouTube channel.
Right.
So we know that they exist. What about them telling their story is less appealing than someone else not from there telling their story?
Exactly. And that's the thing. There would not have been even all this attention on Witches if she had not been like the first major American writer doing this. If she were 1 in 10,000, that's a glory and a victory. And it wouldn't be all the, like JL said, we're not asking surely for one person to be able to have everyone be seen, but that's what we want when she's the first. And the first is dangerous language because at this rate, no one's the first of anything. But when it seems that to us and our place that she seems to be the first that we've seen, then there is all this pressure in the book to do all these things and deliver all these things. And I'm not saying that to undermine the reviewer because her points are super valid. Y'all should read her review. Nothing but truth.
Right.
Nothing but truth. So, but if we had those 10,000 books, then there would not be all this pressure for Witches to be fantastic.
Right.
It would just be what
Black
it is.
Panther came out because it was the only one and the first. There were so many different commentaries on different things that we didn't see. And it's like, like,
yeah, do everything.
I understand that. We understand that people want to be seen, but we also understand that if we weren't making it so we only did this once in a blue moon, people wouldn't be searching for themselves in this one thing that can't possibly encompass everybody.
Exactly. Because and that's honestly
that is the nature of an individual person, first of all.
Huh?
I said that's too much to put on an individual person.
Exactly. And second of all, that's the nature of looking. If I am looking over here, I am automatically not looking over there. It's not possible. And so when we have a book that shows us a certain perspective, there's always going to be something that was left out, just because when that's just the nature of attention. It's not everywhere. It's in a particular direction. That is how you pay attention, by focusing on one particular focal point or perspective. And so everyone wanting to be fed off this book, like, not if you're all going for that same turkey leg, you're not. Like, it's only going in that one direction. And if that's not your direction,
right,
then you can't expect that.
The issue not being the author's fault. It goes back to being what publishing is allowing to be out
exactly
there. Because if you're only allowing one person to get through with their Caribbean inspired story, when there are multiple writing and querying them, well, then now you do have the issue where everybody who is Caribbean is looking at this one book, because instead you didn't publish the 5 that you could have.
Exactly. Right. Well, everyone doesn't want to read 5.
Right.
And that's the thing, like, when you have to negotiate with whiteness to get your story to non-white readers, you're always going to have compromises that you are not comfortable with and that your readers are going to resent.
Right.
And maybe that's an appropriate place to end.
I think so. I think that was good. Honestly, like, we said what we said. All right, y'all. Well, you know how we do. We love to hear your thoughts on the conversation, especially if you are of the African diaspora, but you are not American. We would love to hear your thoughts on this, especially if you're a writer, because I would definitely love to hear that. Let's see, what should we have them do this month? What should we have them do?
If you made it this far in the video, comment. I mean, should we?
I got some.
Go ahead.
Comment a book rec from an African or Caribbean author. So not American, but an African or Caribbean author, like set in the world or whatever. Just so that we have a chance to, upgrade what we're reading, right?
Yep.
Because I was talking to Bree from Locked
Booktition
the other day, and I was like, at one point in time, I was like, on my BookTube channel, as I continue to actually make content whenever I start doing that, I don't want anybody to say nothing, because 90% of the stuff I read, more like 95, are going to be Black. And I was like, because the realization I had was in 2020, I had watched Left on Red. I'll put her channel in the description box as well. And she had like 2 videos of like lists of Black authors. It's on my refrigerator. Y'all, of the 40 books I've read this year, probably 35 are by Black authors. All by authors I had never read before the start of this year. Like,
that's great.
Except for Elizabeth Acevedo. I think she's the only one that like I had read before the start of this year. I've only scratched off 2 names on that list.
Oh, well, it's time to get to work.
Y'all, so the realization that I had was legitimately I could read Black authors for the rest of my life and never have to read nobody else, and I still probably wouldn't read everything that Black people have written. Was just an exciting feeling, y'all. So if y'all could just add some more book recs to this list on my refrigerator, I would greatly appreciate it, is all I'm saying.
Do you know Njeri at Onyx Pages?
Yeah.
All of her recs are like, she reads basically nothing but Black SFF, and she doesn't.
So that's how I found out about Dr. Okorafor. That's how I was watching one of her videos, and it was a premiere, and she was in it, and so then like she started coming to my lives and stuff. So yeah. But all right, so if you made it this far, please comment your favorite science fiction fantasy written by Caribbean or African authors. Help us get our reading list up. We had fun buddy reading in June, so we might do another buddy read before the year is out. So
yes, y'all can pick our next buddy read.
Ooh, that would be okay. Let's do that. We'll get the names and then we'll put a poll on my channel on my channel one day and then see whichever.
Yes, y'all pick us a good book. Okay, don't have me out here because I don't have patience for annoying protagonists. Please don't have me out here blowing up cachet phone for no reason.
And if you think it's gonna possibly annoy her, let me read it first so I can like it and then be like, no, keep going. That's the only way she made it through the other black girl, y'all. I was like, keep going.
Literally, so many throw my notebook moments.
Right. But it was good as a writer. We did talk about that. So you did watch that. Catch that in the description box below. That was really fun. But yeah, again, I'm Cachet, and this has been episode 8 of Writerly Conversations. And we thank you so much for taking your time to watch. I'll let Brett do her outro, and then we'll say bye. Or do we just say bye? Or do we just? I can't remember now.
I'm Britt. My channel is Britt Writerly. It is a book and author tube that talks about the intersection of literature and culture. Hop on over, check out some videos, thumbs up whatever you watch, drop a little comment. It can be anything. If you watch the video for long enough, I'll probably give you a comment prompt. But if you just are like, you can still drop a little heart, whatever. If you do like the content enough, hit that big red button and we can be internet friends. I find it hilarious that Cachet it's like a wave. I'll do it and she's always a second behind, and she also just like, I just love it. I love it. So do that, and we will see y'all on my channel in August, my birthday month, so you know it's gonna be live. Until then, bye bye.